She went to the party pretending she belonged in that world. Her date humiliated her and vanished with someone else. When the most handsome stranger in the room pulled her by the waist and kissed her in front of everyone, she thought it was a rescue. But her body froze. She had felt that mouth before, that touch on the nape of her neck, that rhythm, that exact pressure 7 years ago. In a dark room, with a faceless man. Her first time. He pulled away. He whispered in her ear, "You still react the same way, Julia." She froze because she had never told him her name.
Hi, I'm Rowan. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted.
Chapter 1. The Kiss He Never Forgot. The ballroom breathed old money. Crystal chandeliers hung heavy over heads groomed with the precision of those who never had to worry about the wind, and the sound of heels against polished marble created a sort of cruel, rhythmic, almost liturgical music. It was the kind of party where even the silence had a last name, and Julia Vasconcelos didn't have enough of a last name to be there. She adjusted the strap of the black dress that had cost 3 months' rent for the 4th time and tried to look like someone who belonged in that place. The problem was that the dress was impeccable, but her eyes still betrayed the woman who 3 hours ago was eating ramen while memorizing a speech about international real estate investments she barely understood. She smiled at a lady in pearls. The lady did not return the smile. Great start. "My love, come here," said Raphael, her date for the night, pulling her elbow with the gentleness of someone handling a closed umbrella. "I want to introduce you to someone important. Very important." She swallowed her sigh, planted her smile again and followed. Raphael was the kind of man who had been handsome in the recent past and hadn't yet realized he had stopped being so. He spoke loudly, gestured too much, and wore his watch as if it were an extension of his personality. Perhaps it was the only extension available. She had accepted the invitation for pragmatic reasons. He had contacts. She needed contacts. The deal was simple, professional, almost elegant in theory. In practice, for 40 minutes, he had been treating her like a piece of furniture he was thinking of returning. "This is Dr. Albuquerque," Raphael said, stopping in front of a white-haired man. "And this is—" He hesitated, blinked, adjusted his tie. "Julia." "Joanna," the doctor corrected, smiling kindly. "Julia," she said, still smiling. "Julia, right. That's what I said," Raphael added without any embarrassment. "Julia Vasconcelos. She works with—" Another pause, painful, prolonged. "Market stuff. Market stuff." She almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she extended her hand to Dr. Albuquerque with the firmness of someone who urgently needs to leave that conversation before the ceiling collapses from second-hand embarrassment. "Corporate risk analysis," she completed. "Pleasure to meet you." The doctor murmured something polite and left quickly, like someone who recognizes a social shipwreck in time to jump off the boat. Julia remained standing, smiling as if she were loving every second, internally planning the best escape route. Window, bathroom, service kitchen, any place that had less silk and more oxygen. "You need to relax," Raphael said, lowering his tone as if making a technical observation. "You're stiff. You look like a secretary." "I'm my own secretary," she replied sweetly. "It's a demanding position." He laughed, not at what she said, but because he thought she was being charming. It was the 3rd time that night she realized he didn't listen to anything she said. It was liberating, actually. She could say anything. "Raphael, if I shove this glass into your neck, do you think anyone would notice?" He laughed again, distracted, already looking at another group. "You're funny, babe. Stay here a second. I'm going over there to talk to Sergio. Important business." She was going to respond, but he had already turned his back. The glass felt cold in her hand. And then, in a move she didn't even see coming, Raphael turned around again, now with a blonde in a red dress hanging off his arm, as if it were natural, as if she had been there the whole time, and said, without any shame, "Take a walk, okay? We'll catch up later." She stood still. For 2 whole seconds she stood still. Then she smiled, wide, real, her first real smile of the night, because it was ridiculous, Because it was humiliating. Because it was exactly the kind of thing she would laugh about with her best friend later, watering the story with bad wine and doing a victory dance over Raphael's moral corpse. But for now, she just needed to vanish. She crossed the ballroom pretending to have a destination. Feigning a destination is a skill learned early when you grow up without one. She passed waiters, men who looked down at her, women who looked at her sideways, and a mirror that showed for a moment a version of her that did look like she belonged there, and also looked like she was about to cry. That's when it happened. A scent. Just that at first. Wood, something citrusy, something dark underneath like kept leather. And the sudden, strange sensation that the air had changed density. She stopped walking before she understood why. A faceless memory opened inside her like an old door. Firm hands on her back. A low voice saying something she couldn't repeat. Cold sheets. The darkness of a room she no longer recognized. Maybe she never had. It was fast. A flash. And it was gone. She shook her head, annoyed with herself. Not now, not here. You look like you're about to do something reckless. The voice came from behind. Deep, restrained, with the kind of calm that isn't acquired. It's inherited. Julia turned slowly, glass still in hand, and took a moment to focus on the man looking at her as if he'd known her for years. He was tall, taller than was comfortable. He wore black on black, with the precision of someone who doesn't decide on an outfit every day because they don't have to. His face had strong features, a sharp jawline, and eyes of a color that the chandelier light made impossible to define, dark, attentive, and slightly amused, as if she were a private joke he was revisiting. "And you are what?" she asked, regaining her tone. "The security guard for other people's recklessness." He smiled slightly, just one corner of his mouth. Something like that. "Then excuse me, because I have a window to find." She tried to pass. He didn't block her. Men of that type never need to physically block. But his presence was simply there in the way like a polite wall. Julia stopped. She lifted her chin. "Your date," he said, in a tone bordering on boredom, "just traded you for a woman he called his cousin. Did you know he had a cousin?" "I'm sure he does," she replied. "Raphael's family is very close-knit." He laughed. It was a short, low, contained sound, as if he himself were surprised. And Julia felt, despite herself, her stomach do a strange flip. It was the kind of laugh responsible women avoid. She had been responsible enough for an entire lifetime. "I can get you out of here," he said. "I don't know you." "You do," he replied simply. She blinked. "Excuse me? Let's skip that part for now." And then, before she could respond, Raphael appeared again in the corner of her eye, the cousin still glued to his arm, coming toward them with that smile of someone who was going to try to fix something they hadn't even realized they broke. Julia felt her chest tighten with anticipation, another round of public humiliation, now with an audience. "No, no, no, no. Please," she said quietly, without looking at the man beside her. "Get me out of here. Ask more politely." She turned her face. His eyes were closer than she expected, and there was something in them between amusement and something much older, something she couldn't immediately name, something that looked like waiting, as if he already knew what was going to happen and was just checking the script. "Please," she repeated, her voice nearly steady. And then he moved. It wasn't fast. It was worse than fast. It was certain. His hand found her waist as if it knew the way, as if it had traveled that path before and was just revisiting an old route. The touch was firm, possessive in the exact measure, without brutality, without hesitation. The other hand moved up to the nape of her neck, and Julia had time exactly to think one single thing, "Oh no," before his mouth found hers. And the world skipped a beat. She expected it to be uncomfortable. She expected to have to hide the embarrassment, fake the chemistry, endure it with the professionalism that life teaches women like her. What she didn't expect, what no one, ever, on any night could have expected, was for her body to respond before her mind, for her shoulders to relax, for her free hand to move up, a traitor to his chest and stay there, not pushing, not pulling away, for something deep inside her, far away, forgotten, to say with absurd certainty, I've been here before. Her breath hitched. It wasn't the kiss. It was the recognition. It was the way his hand moved up a millimeter, the exact pressure on her neck, the angle of his head, the rhythm. It was every tiny detail she wouldn't know how to describe to anyone, but that her body had kept in a vault she didn't even know existed. It was the faceless memory opening again, now with sound, now with scent, now with the exact shape of that mouth against hers. She pulled back an inch, just one. She couldn't do more. He didn't retreat. He kept his forehead nearly pressed against hers, his hand still firm on her waist. And when he spoke, it was so low that only she heard, and yet she heard it with her whole body, not her ears. You still react the same way. Her heart stopped. Started again. Skipped. What? She whispered. He pulled away just enough to look her in the eyes, and there was something terrible there, calm, ancient. Something that knew, something that waited. What? She repeated, firmer, her voice trembling only at the edges. But he was already pulling away, his hand sliding from her waist with the deliberate slowness of someone marking territory without needing to say a word. Julia stood there in the middle of the ballroom, with the taste of that man in her mouth and an entire memory trying to reconstruct itself inside her, piece by piece. Raphael had vanished. The chandeliers kept hanging heavy. Someone laughed, far away, and the man in black, already 3 steps away, turned his face over his shoulder and said, with that half-smile of someone who had just moved the first piece in a game the other person hadn't yet realized they were playing, "Good night, Julia." She hadn't told him her name, she hadn't told him her name. And as he disappeared among the guests, with the elegance of a shadow that chose the exact moment to exit the scene, she realized with a sudden chill running down her spine that that night, the faceless night, the night she had buried, the night she thought had been an anonymous mistake of her youth, perhaps had never been anonymous at all, perhaps she had just reunited with the man she spent years trying to forget, and perhaps he had never, not for a single second, forgotten her. Chapter 2. The Dangerous Seduction begins. Julia Vasconcelos spent 3 days trying to convince her own body that it hadn't happened. It was a difficult task. The body is a cruel archivist. It keeps what the mind wants to lose and loses what the mind tries to keep. Every time she closed her eyes in the shower, on the subway, in the elevator of the building where she worked, the firm hand on her waist returned. The nape of her neck remembered. Her lips remembered. And that phrase, "You still react the same way," circulated inside her like a song she hadn't asked to hear. The worst part was that she didn't know his name. She had tried, of course. She had called a colleague who was at the party, faking casual curiosity, mentioning a tall man in black who spoke to me briefly. The colleague had laughed. "Honey, half the men at that party were tall and in black. You're going to need to be more specific." Julia couldn't do it. How do you describe an entire man using polite words? The one who kissed me as if I had already been his once. No. Thank you. On Thursday afternoon she received the email. Meeting confirmed. Client requests your presence in person. Aurora Building, 4 p.m. boardroom. Do not be late. He hates lateness. She reread it 3 times. The client was new, important. So important that her boss almost tripped over his words when he passed the case to her on Monday. Nameless, only with the information that it was an opportunity that can change your trajectory here. Julia had thanked him with the discretion learned when working in a company where the last name still weighs more than competence. Now, standing before the mirror in the corporate bathroom, adjusting her grey blazer for the 5th time, she tried not to think about the strange detail. Client requests your presence in person, and the absurd coincidence of that opportunity falling into her lap exactly 4 days after that party. Coincidence, she said to herself out loud in the mirror. This is just a coincidence. The woman in the mirror didn't look convinced. The Aurora Building was made of smoked glass, one of those buildings that look taller than they are because they were designed to make anyone arriving feel small. Julia crossed the lobby with a practiced step, smiled at the receptionist, took her temporary badge and entered the elevator alone. 22 floors. Enough time to check her lipstick, her hair, her breathing, and her posture. Enough time to start suspecting. When the doors opened on the executive floor, an assistant in glasses guided her down a hallway of thick carpet, stopped before a double door of dark wood, and said, with that rehearsed neutrality of well-paid secretaries, "He is waiting for you." He. Not the doctor. Not the director. Just he, as if there were already a pact between the one saying it and the one hearing it. Julia took a deep breath, rested her hand on the doorknob, and opened the door. And the air left her lungs all at once. He was standing by the window, his back turned, dark suit, broad shoulders, the same silhouette she had tried to erase all week. When he turned slowly, with the calm of someone who already knew exactly who was going to walk through that door, it was his smile that destroyed her first. Small, contained, satisfied, the smile of someone who set a trap. "Ms. Vasconcelos," he said, as if they were just beginning. What impressive punctuality. Julia stood frozen at the door. Her hand was still on the knob, as if she were seriously considering turning around and giving up on her career. "You," she said. "Me," he agreed. "Enrique Sampaio. It's a pleasure to formally meet you now since last time we skipped a few steps." Blood rushed to the roots of her hair. She closed the door behind her with more force than intended, crossed the carpet with firm steps, and stopped in front of the desk with her chin up and her hands perfectly still at her sides, because if she let one of them go, she might throw a chair through the window. "This is a setup." "This," Enrique said, gesturing to the room with light-colored walls, the mahogany desk, the city skyline in the background, "is a professional meeting. You were recommended by your boss. I am the client. Everything is by the book. You sought me out. I found you," he corrected, with the patience of someone teaching a new word to someone else. "It's different. Sit down." "I'm not sitting." "You are. You didn't come all the way here to leave before understanding what is happening. I know you well enough to know that." The phrase hung in the air between them. "I know you well enough." Julia hated that the phrase had the effect it did, a low, irritating tug in the pit of her stomach. She sat down. She crossed her legs with deliberate slowness, rested her hands in her lap, and looked at him like someone looking at a difficult math problem that refuses to be solved in front of the teacher. 5 minutes, she said. "After that, I walk out of this room and you don't look for me again." Enrique sat down too, but not behind the desk. He sat in the chair next to hers, turned toward her, with that kind of proximity that isn't exactly intimate but also isn't exactly appropriate. His knees were a few inches from hers. His eyes, now, under natural light she saw, were nearly dark brown, with flecks of a warmer color near the pupil. She hated having noticed that. "You remember me," he said quietly. "I don't remember you." "You remember parts." Julia opened her mouth to say something sharp, but the words didn't come. Because he was right, and because she hated that he was right, and because at that exact moment with his knees so close to hers, she had a sudden flash, not of his face, not yet, but of the weight of a hand on the side of her hip in the darkness of a room that wasn't hers. So vivid she nearly turned her head to check if the hand was there. It wasn't. He hadn't even moved. "Did you arrange something with me?" she asked, and her voice came out lower than she wanted. "That night. Who were you that night?" "I was a man," Enrique replied calmly, "who shouldn't have gone near you, and yet I did." "That's not an answer." "It's the possible answer for now." She felt her chin tremble and hid it by clenching her teeth. "You knew I would be at that party last week. I knew as soon as I saw your name on the list. And you set it all up." "I set up the kiss," he admitted, without any embarrassment. "The party was a coincidence." His frankness destabilized her more than any lie would have. Julia looked at his hand resting on the arm of the chair, a large hand with long fingers, no ring, with a small scar on the knuckle of his middle finger, and looked away before that hand also appeared in her memory. "I'm not that kind of woman," she said, and even to her it sounded fragile. Enrique tilted his head to the side with that half-smile she was already starting to recognize and loathe. "No," he said softly. "You're exactly that kind." "Excuse me?" "The type that pretends to be in control." He leaned forward a bit, and his voice dropped another notch, and Julia had to send a direct order to her lungs to keep working. "You've always liked to pretend you're in control, even when you're not, especially when you're not." The sentence landed inside her like a key turning in an old lock, because she had heard that before. Not the exact words. The exact words had been different, the voice had been different, the place had been different. But the shape of the sentence, the rhythm, the way he said it with surgical calm, was identical to something someone had whispered against her ear on a night she had buried somewhere very deep within herself. Julia stood up. "I'm leaving," she said. "Sit." "No, Julia." It was the first time he had said her name there, and the name came out of his mouth as if it had been kept in his suit's inside pocket for years. She stood there, holding her bag strap too tightly. Enrique stood up too, slowly. He didn't come close. He didn't have to. The whole room felt small. "I didn't come here to scare you," he said. "I came here to offer you a contract. Risk analysis for my holding. 6 months. An amount that will solve the next 3 years of your life. You decide if you accept. You're buying me. I'm giving you an advantage no one else was going to give you." He took a step, just one. "The difference matters." She looked up. His eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her lose for a second the sense of her own breathing. So close. Always so too close. And she felt again with terrifying clarity the absurd impulse to close her eyes and let her body remember what her memory was still hiding. She didn't close them. "I'll think about it," she said, in a thread of a voice. "Think," he agreed. And then, lower, almost to himself, "But don't take long. People have been watching you for longer than you imagine." She already had her hand on the knob when the sentence reached her. She stopped, looked over her shoulder. "What did you mean by that?" Enrique didn't answer. He just looked at her in silence with that face she now knew was the face missing from all the memories, and Julia understood with a shiver running down her spine that the night she thought had been hers and his alone perhaps had never been just the two of them. She left without answering, and as she went down the 22 floors, alone again in the mirrored elevator, she felt her phone vibrate inside her bag. She pulled it out, looked, unknown number, just one line. "Be careful what he offers you." That night wasn't what you think it was. The screen went dark on its own, and for the first time since she had entered that penthouse, Julia understood that perhaps the man who had just nearly touched her face wasn't exactly the man she thought he was. Chapter 3. The Fall. The whole week, Julia tried to act as if the message didn't exist. She deleted it, blocked the number, reopened the conversation 3 times to check if she had really deleted it. Reread every word from memory, even though the screen no longer showed anything. Be careful what he offers you. That night wasn't what you think it was. She thought about showing the police, thought about showing a friend, thought about calling Enrique Sampaio and asking him directly. And she did none of the 3 things because each of them required her to admit out loud that she was afraid. And Julia Vasconcelos didn't admit fear even to herself, let alone to others. Instead, she worked. She worked too much, actually. She filled the days with spreadsheets, meetings, calls, opinions. She accepted dinners with colleagues she would normally decline, stayed at the office until after 10 and went back to the gym. Anything to keep her brain busy enough not to return, without permission, to the image of Enrique standing against the window with that half smile of someone who had waited years for a door to open. It was on a Tuesday, exactly 11 days after that meeting, that everything collapsed. She was on the subway going home when her phone started to vibrate. Once, twice, 4 times, 7. In seconds, the screen filled with notifications, and Julia felt her pulse quicken even before reading what was written. She opened the first message. It was from her boss. "Julia, call me now." The second was from a colleague. "Girl, did you see what they're posting? Call me as soon as you can." The third was from a number she didn't even have saved. The fourth, the fifth. She opened the news app with fingers trembling slightly, typed her own name into the search field, and her world stopped in the middle of the track. Risk analyst identified as key player in financial scandal involving São Paulo elite. The photo in the article was her. From 3 years ago, her hair shorter, a professional smile, her headshot from her previous company's website. The text accused her, with the cruel calm of well-written articles, of having manipulated internal reports to favor a group of investors linked to a businessman whose name she barely recognized. They cited documents. They cited anonymous sources. They cited patterns of behavior, an expression as vague as it was poisonous. Julia got off the subway at the wrong station. She walked 3 blocks aimlessly. She sat on a park bench, still in heels, with her bag in her lap and her coat open, and stared at the phone screen as if it were a living thing that might calm down if she didn't make any sudden movements. It didn't calm down. The calls began. She didn't answer any. Her boss again, HR, an international number, a journalist, another journalist, a friend, another. The phone vibrated non-stop, and each vibration was a hammer blow to her chest. And Julia understood with a cold clarity that didn't seem to be her own, that when she left that bench, her life would no longer be the same life. It was at that exact moment that a black car pulled up at the corner. She saw it without seeing it, saw it as if she were watching a movie. The back door opened, and Enrique Sampaio stepped out. Dark suit, no tie this time, his hair slightly messy, as if he had jumped from a meeting straight into that car. He crossed the street with long strides, stopped in front of her, and didn't even ask if he could. He just extended his hand. Come. How did you know where I was? Come, not here. Enrique, how did you know? I had someone follow you from the moment the news broke. Come. The sentence should have made her back away, it should have. Instead, she put her hand in his, let herself be lifted, let herself be led to the car, let herself be settled into the dark leather seat, and only when the door closed, muffling the world outside, did she realize she had stopped breathing deeply some time ago. The car moved. She looked out the window without seeing anything. He didn't speak for the first few minutes. He just held out a small bottle of water, opened it for her and waited for her to drink. It was the kind of gesture men like him made to seem human, she thought, with a cynicism that surprised her. But the water helped. I didn't do that, she said finally. Her voice was hoarse. Enrique, I swear I never touched those reports. I know. She turned her face. You know. I know, he repeated, with a calm she almost hated. That's why you're inside this car and not answering questions in your boss's lobby. Why would someone do this to me? Enrique looked at her. It was a long look, and in it were things she didn't yet know how to read. Guilt, perhaps, or calculation, or something worse, something that seemed to weigh heavy. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her hand, still squeezing the water bottle, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower. Julia, I need you to come with me to a safer place now. We'll talk there. I want to talk now. I can't. Why? He sighed. It was the first time she saw a crack in that absurd control of his, and for some reason it scared her more than if he had screamed. Because what I have to tell you, he said, his eyes fixed on hers, isn't the kind of thing you say in the back seat of a car. The penthouse was in a building Julia knew from the outside, one of those West Zone towers whose top floors only existed in rumors. The elevator rose in silence. She didn't look at him during the trip. He didn't try to look at her. When the doors opened directly into the living room, a huge space with high ceilings, glass walls showing the entire city as if it were a miniature, Julia entered slowly, took off her heels without asking permission, and went to the window. The city gave no comfort, but it gave distance, and distance at that moment was the closest thing to air she could breathe. Enrique took off his jacket. He laid it over the back of a chair. He approached, but didn't get too close. He stopped a few steps from her, hands in his pockets, and stood looking at her reflection in the glass. I've been intimate with you before, he said. The voice was calm, direct, without flourish. And Julia was so surprised by the choice of words that it took a whole second to process. What? She asked without turning. You heard me. Enrique. That night, he said, wasn't the first time you heard my voice. You know that. Your body knows that. You just don't know it was me. She turned slowly. Her heart was beating in the wrong place, in her neck, in her temples, in her wrists. I never... You remember. His voice cut through her sentence like a clean blade. You just don't know who. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. Julia opened her mouth, closed it. She felt her eyes sting and commanded them, with all the strength she had, not to fill with water. Then she sat in the nearest armchair, because her legs were not willing to continue holding that weight. "It was you," she said slowly. It wasn't a question. It was. The hotel night, the dark room, the voice that... It was. She rested her elbows on her knees and let her head fall between her hands. For an absurd moment she laughed. It was a short laugh, not funny at all, but she laughed. Because if she didn't laugh then, she was going to cry, and crying in front of him was the last humiliation she could still avoid. "Great," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "Sure, perfect. I lost my virginity to an emotionally unstable billionaire, and I didn't even get to see his face properly. Brilliant. Round of applause for me." Enrique stood still. He didn't laugh. He didn't answer right away. When he spoke, his voice had changed again, dropped another note, got closer to something dangerous. "I never forgot you." She lifted her face. "I looked for you," he continued, "for years. In places I shouldn't have looked, with people I shouldn't have involved, I never found you." He took a step, just one. "Until last week." She couldn't speak. He took another step, and then another. He stopped in front of the chair, knelt down slowly in a way that had nothing submissive about it, but was instead calculated, intimate, someone deliberately leveling themselves, and his eyes were level with hers, so close she could see the exact spot where the brown turned to black. "I shouldn't have touched you at that party," he said softly, "but I was the mistake you could never forget, and I couldn't let it pass." She breathed deeply. His hand rose slowly and stopped in the air an inch from her face. He didn't touch her. He waited. And it was this wait, this silent question he was asking without asking, that nearly broke her. "Enrique," she whispered. "Tell me to leave," he replied in the same tone. "Say it and I'll leave." She didn't say it. He didn't touch her either. The two stayed there on this impossible edge, with shallow breath and the city shining behind the glass. For a time Julia wouldn't be able to measure later. It was she who finally closed her eyes. It was he who finally lowered his hand. And when he stood up and walked away slowly, she felt with absurd clarity that something inside her had just shifted places forever. "I'll leave you here tonight," he said, already at the living room door without turning. "Everything you need is here. Tomorrow we'll talk about the rest." "The rest?" He stopped. He turned his head just slightly, enough for her to see his profile, the tense line of his jaw. "Do you really think," he said, "that the news that came out today has nothing to do with me?" And he left before she could answer. Julia remained in the armchair, her whole body trembling from an exhaustion that wasn't physical, listening to the door close far away. She looked at the city, looked at her own hands, looked at her phone, which she had forgotten on the side table, and which now vibrated again with another message from the same unknown number. She picked it up, opened it, read. Ask him about the 2021 audit. Ask him who he was negotiating with that night. Ask him why he looked for you, for real. The screen went black on its own, and for the first time since she had entered that penthouse, Julia understood that perhaps the man who had just nearly touched her face wasn't exactly the man she thought he was. Chapter 4. The Hidden Truth. Julia didn't sleep. She tried. She lay down in the guest room's enormous bed, because of course there was a guest room, of course. He had placed a folded change of clothes on the chair. Of course everything in the penthouse functioned with the silent precision of a life she had never had. She closed her eyes and her brain refused to cooperate. Every time she nearly fell asleep, the phrase returned. Ask him about the 2021 audit, and then his face, kneeling before the armchair, and then the photo in the article, and then his hand an inch from her face, waiting for a permission that never came. Around 3 in the morning she gave up. She got up barefoot, put on the silk robe that was at the foot of the bed, dark, masculine, clearly his, and left the room in silence. The penthouse was partially lit, in a low-light scheme that seemed programmed for that hour, and Julia crossed the hallway with the strange feeling of invading the life of a man she still didn't quite know. She found him in the office. The door was ajar. He was facing away, sitting at a massive desk with the laptop light illuminating his features from below, giving him a tired look she had never seen before. His white shirt was open at the collar. His hair was messy from his own fingers. Henrique Sampaio in private mode was a slightly different man than the Henrique Sampaio in public mode. More human, perhaps. More dangerous, certainly, because it was this Henrique that a smart woman might, without realizing it, start to find handsome. She knocked lightly on the door. He turned. "You can't sleep," he said. It wasn't a question. "No." She entered, closed the door behind her, and stopped in the middle of the rug. "We need to talk now." "I know." "The 2021 audit." He didn't move, but she really saw with a clarity that surprised her, the exact microsecond in which something in his eyes hardened. "Who told you about that?" "The same person who has been messaging me for the last 10 days, warning me to be careful with what you were going to offer me." She took a deep breath. "Henrique, I need you to tell me the truth. No stalling, no sugar-coated version, none of this 'I'll tell you tomorrow' stuff. Now." He looked at her for a long time. Then he closed the laptop. He pointed to the armchair in front of the desk. Julia sat down. She crossed her legs under the robe. She waited. "That night," he began slowly, "wasn't a coincidence. I already suspected as much. Not for you, either." The sentence hit Julia in the stomach before she even understood why. She sat motionless, waiting for him to explain, and for an instant, she had the sharp sensation of being about to learn something she wouldn't be able to unlearn later. "What do you mean, not for me, either?" Henrique rested his elbows on the desk. He rubbed his face with both hands. When he looked at her again, there was a kind of ancient weariness in that gaze, as if what he was about to say was something he had rehearsed years ago and never had anyone to tell. "7 years ago," he began, "I was closing a corporate deal that shouldn't have existed. 3 groups, irregular movements, a shadow fund. The kind of thing that if it leaked would topple half the last names at that party where we met again. I was the youngest at the table. I was the one who shouldn't have agreed to it. And you did. And I did." He smiled without humor. "I was 26 and ambition had no room for morals yet." "Henrique, what does this have to do with—" "That night was the night of the closing. The place where we met, the event, the hotel, everything, wasn't a normal hotel. It was a front. A space rented by one of the parties to serve as cover. Everything happening there was planned to mask a transfer that was going to take place downstairs at the same time." Julia felt the blood drain from her face. "I was there," she whispered. "You were there," he confirmed, "and I didn't know why. To this day, I've only discovered part of it." "What part?" He looked her in the eyes, and it was with the surgical calm of someone delivering a sentence that he said, "You were placed there. You weren't there by chance. Someone took you." The air left her lungs all at once. She tried hard to remember, who had invited her, who had paid, who had said, "You need to go to this party, it's a good opportunity," and her memory, treacherous, returned only fragments. A friend, a card, a promise of important contacts, vague things, blurry things, things that 7 years later seemed so small she had never thought to piece them together. "No," she said. "No, I went because a friend." "Your friend was paid." "Henrique, that's absurd." "I know." His voice was low. "I know how it sounds." "Why?" Her voice failed. Julia hated that it had failed. "Why would someone put me there?" "Distraction." The word hung in the air. "You were the distraction," he continued, and there was now a contained anger in his voice that wasn't directed at her. A beautiful young woman, alone, out of place, on the wrong floor, at the wrong time. If something went wrong with that transfer, if someone showed up asking the wrong questions, you were the diversion, the small scandal to drown out the big one. She felt nausea rise in her throat. She swallowed. "And you?" she asked, her voice thin. "Did you know? That night? No. I swear. I swear. And today? How long have you known?" Silence. "Henrique, how long?" 3 years, he said finally. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet. and she didn't try to hide it anymore. 3 years, she repeated. For 3 years you knew I had been used as a pawn in a game I wasn't even playing, and you didn't look for me. I didn't know who you were until 3 years ago. His voice turned sharp for the first time. I searched for you since that night, Julia, but I didn't know your name. I knew your voice, I knew your laugh, I didn't know your last name. When I finally found out 3 years ago, you were already at the company of a man being investigated by the same network of people who had put you in that hotel, and I stayed away. Why? To protect you. Liar. To protect you, and, he admitted, and the honesty in this correction was almost worse than the lie, to understand if you knew, if you were part of it, if those 3 years of your career were what they seemed to be, or if you had remained involved without me noticing. Julia stood up. She walked to the office window. She leaned her forehead against the cold glass. She looked at the city below without seeing anything, and for a long time she could only think of one thing, on repeat, in a loop. I was never the owner of my own life. I never knew. I never knew. And the scandal from yesterday? She asked without turning. It's the continuation. What do you mean, continuation? Someone, he said slowly, knows that I found you. Someone saw us at the party. Someone understood that if we get close, and if you start to remember, and if I start to talk, the entire story of that night comes to light, and a lot of important people can't allow that. She turned around. So they threw me to the media now to destroy me before I speak. To destroy you before you remember. You are the only living witness from that night who hasn't been bought or silenced yet. He took a deep breath, and I, like an idiot, came close to you again knowing that I should have stayed away. Why didn't you? The question came out before she could control it. Enrique stood up. He crossed the office slowly and stopped before her at the window, with a respectful space between their bodies that nonetheless felt dangerously small. He looked down at her with that gaze of his that was neither dominance nor a plea, but something between the two, something for which there was no exact word. Because I recognized you, he said, the second I touched you at the party, and I lost any chance of doing the right thing. She felt her chin tremble. Are you lying now? She asked quietly. Tell me if you are, I'd rather know. I'm not. You would be. Probably. He almost smiled. But this time, I'm not. She closed her eyes. She felt his hand rise again and stop, again, an inch from her face. And this time, this one time, she tilted her face toward his hand, and his fingers met her skin with the gentleness of someone touching an open wound. I don't know if I can trust you, she whispered. You can't. Enrique. You can't, he repeated calmly. But you're smarter than I am, Julia. You always were. You'll figure out the rest before I do. And when you do, I'd rather be on your side than on the other side of the room. It was in that moment, exactly that moment, that her phone vibrated again in her robe pocket. She took it out, opened it. It was a photo, an old black and white, low-quality photo, of her 7 years ago entering an elevator, accompanied by a woman she didn't recognize, and below the photo, 3 lines. This woman who is with you in this photo introduced you to the man who is holding you now. Ask him who she is. Ask him how she died. Julia's hand trembled. Enrique saw the screen before she had time to hide it, and his face, the face she had just started to read, closed up in a way she had never seen. He recognized the woman. She saw that he recognized her. And for the first time that night, in that encounter, in that entire story, it was he who lost his color. Chapter 5. The Mistake They Could Never Forget. The photo stayed open on the phone screen for a long time. Julia didn't take her eyes off it. Enrique didn't take his eyes off Julia. And the woman in the image, a brunette with an easy smile, hair pulled back, her arm linked with that of a younger, more naive Julia, more of everything the woman today had already unlearned how to be, remained there, smiling at a camera no one else remembered holding. You know who she is, Julia finally said. Enrique didn't answer right away. He walked to the desk. He leaned both hands on it, his back to Julia, and stayed for a moment with just his shoulders rising and falling with his breath. When he turned, his face had returned to its usual control, but his eyes hadn't. His eyes were different. I do. Who? The woman who introduced me to the negotiation group. He spoke slowly, choosing each word with the precision of someone disarming a bomb. The same one who likely introduced you to a good opportunity 7 years ago. She worked for both sides, Julia. She was the bridge. And she died. She died. He looked at her. 3 months after that night. Car accident. Back then I didn't ask any questions because I shouldn't have. Today I know it wasn't an accident. Julia turned off the phone screen and placed it on the table with a calm that wasn't calm. It was a way to keep from trembling. She sat in the nearest chair, pulled the robe over her legs, looked at Henrique, and for an absurd moment had the feeling she was looking at a man who, in the middle of the chaos, was the only stable thing in that room. And that feeling scared her more than any message. "I'm going to find out," she said. "Everything. Not just the piece that interests you, Henrique. Everything. I was counting on that. And I might find out things about you that will make me leave here without looking back." He tilted his head slightly. "You might. You won't stop me?" "No." His voice was low. "But in the meantime, you stay here. With me. In safety. That point is not negotiable." She raised an eyebrow. "Not negotiable. It's not. Henrique, I'm an adult. I can decide—" "You are an adult," he cut her off. "And there are 3 journalists at the door of your building. An article saying you're a criminal, an anonymous source feeding you information, and a dead woman in your past. Decide whatever you want, but decide it in here." Julia looked at him. For about 2 seconds, she seriously considered fighting. It was her instinct, to argue, to resist, to mark her territory, to remind him that she wasn't any man's property. But this time, deep down, she knew he was right. And worse, she knew part of her wanted to stay. And that was the part that scared her most. "All right," she said. He looked at her, surprised by the speed of her agreement. "All right?" "All right." She crossed her legs. "But with rules. Go on. I will have access to everything you know. Documents, names, dates. No sugar-coated versions. Agreed. I am not yours. You don't decide for me. You don't hide me. You don't protect me from the truth or the danger. I decide what I can handle." He tilted his head. "Agreed." "And when this is all over," she continued, her voice trembling for the first time, "if I want to leave you, let me go." There was a short pause, a silence that felt as thin as glass. "Agreed," Henrique said lower. And she heard for the first time that night something in him crack. The following days were a blur. The press didn't give up. Julia's name became a hashtag, a meme, a Sunday feature story. Her office sent an email saying it was best to pause your activities while the internal investigation runs. Julia read it, laughed without humor, and closed her laptop. Henrique mobilized lawyers, contacts, a private investigator who seemed more military than civilian. He put 3 people to investigate the death of the woman in the photo. He put 2 people to review the 2021 audit, and he began, slowly, with a patience she hadn't expected, to open the files to her. He kept his word. That was the first thing that destabilized her. The second was more subtle. It was the way he got her coffee exactly right on the 4th morning without having asked. It was the way he invited her to dinner, sat across from her, and asked about her childhood, her parents, the cat she'd had when she was 12. Not like an interrogation, but like someone who was, finally, getting to know someone he had already loved from afar for a long time. It was the way on Friday night, after hours hunched over spreadsheets in his office, he draped a blanket over her shoulders without saying a word, and she realized she had dozed off against his shoulder without feeling it, and he hadn't moved so as not to wake her, and it was the way he didn't touch her. Not since that night in the office when his hand had stopped at her face. Since then, it was as if he had decided that the next move, whatever it was, would have to come from her. And that restraint of his, that silent discipline of a man who controlled himself out of respect and not out of a lack of desire, was the most dangerous thing she had ever experienced. Because resisting a man who insists is easy, resisting a man who waits is almost impossible. It was on the 8th day that she heard his phone conversation from the balcony. It was early. The São Paulo sky was still a pre-dawn blue-gray. Julia had left her room to get water, and the office door was ajar, and his voice came low, contained, with that tone of tempered steel he used when giving orders. "I don't care how much it costs. I want the name of the person who sent the story." Pause. "Yes, I know what that implies." Pause. "Look at me. If anyone gets near her while she's in this house, I won't sue. I'll do worse." Julia stopped in the hallway. She shouldn't have heard it. She knew she shouldn't have. But she stayed there, barefoot, in the middle of the dark hallway with the glass of water in her hand, and heard the next sentence leave his mouth with a weight she had never heard before. "I already lost this woman once without knowing. I'm not going to lose her again while knowing." The glass almost slipped from her hand. She went back to her room without making a sound. She sat on the edge of the bed. She spent a long time staring at the wall without seeing it. And then, with a decision that wasn't thought out, it was felt, she got up again, crossed the hallway again, and opened the office door. He was standing by the window, still with the phone in his hand, now turned off. He turned upon hearing the door. The surprise on his face lasted an instant, then it vanished, giving way to that usual control. "You should be sleeping." "I heard you," she said. "How much?" "Enough." He put the phone in his pocket. He didn't move, and the two of them stayed there, separated by the entire rug, with the dawn light starting to enter through the window and tracing a bluish path between them. "Henrique." "Yes. I don't know if I can trust you." "I know. But I can't anymore." Her voice failed. "Pretend that I don't want to." It was the hardest thing she had ever said in her life. She saw, with clarity, the exact second that sentence hit him. His shoulders moved, almost imperceptibly. His breath hitched for an instant, and his eyes finally lost that restraint he had maintained for days. He crossed the room slowly. He didn't run. Men like him don't run. But every step he took was deliberate, and when he stopped in front of her, he stopped exactly too close, and this time there was no space between their bodies, and there was no hand an inch from her face. There was only him, and her, and the decision she had just made. "Are you sure?" he said quietly. "No." "Good." A small half-smile. "Me neither." And he kissed her. It wasn't like the first one. The first had been recognition, possession, a sentence. This one was a choice. It was the first time in their entire story that the kiss wasn't being stolen or offered as a maneuver. It was the first time it was simply being received. His mouth found hers with calm, with method, and Julia felt both his hands rise at once, one finding the nape of her neck, the other her waist, and her body molded to his with the ancient memory and the new desire at the same time. She felt his breath hitch against hers. That was what destroyed her, because a man who controls himself all the time and who loses control for her is a confession without words. "Julia," he murmured against her mouth. "Don't talk," she replied. He laughed softly. It was a small, husky, surprised laugh. "All right." His hand moved down her spine with slowness. It wasn't haste. It wasn't an assault. It was a man retracing a path he had dreamed of retracing for years, and now, finally, he was doing it while awake. Julia felt the robe slip from one shoulder. She felt his hand rest on her bare skin and stay there, still, as if he needed a moment to believe it. "I remember every inch," he whispered against her ear. "I remembered all these years." Her eyes filled with tears. She closed them before he could see. "I didn't," she replied. "I buried it." "I know. But my body didn't bury it." He lifted his face. His fingers rose, found her chin, and lifted it with that firmness of his that was so characteristic. She already recognized it as a signature, and when his eyes met hers, there was something in them Julia had never seen in a man. A harsh tenderness, exhausted, ancient, as if he were finally able to set down a burden he had carried alone for 7 years. "I'm going to touch you now," he said quietly. "Slowly. The way you deserved to be touched the first time. No secrets, no disguise, no dark room. You tell me to stop whenever you want, and if I don't want to." "Then," he replied with that half-smile, "I won't stop." She laughed. A small, choked laugh, completely stripped of defense. And it was that laugh he kissed next, the joy before the mouth, the happiness before the skin. The rest unfolded in silence. It was a night with the delicacy the first one lacked. It was a man relearning the way of a woman he had never unlearned. It was a woman finally surrendering the memory to the body that always knew. Every touch was a silent apology, every kiss a promise that neither dared say out loud. It was her breath against his neck. It was his hand holding hers, like someone holding something that could escape again. It was an entire room of golden light in the window, and two bodies finally at peace with the past they had shared without knowing. And when she fell asleep hours later, her face against his chest, it was the first time in 7 years that Enrique Sampaio slept without the dream of the woman whose name he never knew. She had a name now. She was right there, breathing. The two lovebirds having no idea what would happen the next morning, when secrets from both of them would be unearthed in a disastrous and unforgivable way.
Hey, Rowan here. That's it for Book 1, but guess what? Book 2 is already done. You can grab access to it for just a small fee.
She receives a message. About that night, there is more you should know about the person by your side. On the tablet's cold screen, every image, every video clip, every detail constructed the same cruel narrative. He always knew. He knew who she was. He knew what that night meant. He knew there was something in her drink, and even so, he touched her. He didn't have to say a single word, because the evidence screamed for him. And the worst part, she had believed him this whole time. Her stomach churned, a sudden revulsion rising in her throat, as if every touch of his now burned beneath her skin. As if that kiss, the same one her body recognized before her mind did, had been a mistake disguised as fate. But the final blow came later. Silent, surgical. An old medical report, a name, a date. The air vanished. She had also hidden something. No, not hidden, buried. She had been pregnant. It hadn't just been her first time. She had carried more, much more. The door swung open suddenly. Him. Phone still in hand, his face pale, his eyes consumed by something between shock and despair. So you were pregnant? His voice came out low, cracking. With our child, where is he? What did you do with him? She looked up, completely destroyed. They stole more than just that night from us. The silence between them shattered. They stole everything, he replied, broken. Her phone vibrated. A new message, a file, and one last sentence. That wasn't the only thing they hid from you.
Like I said, that was just a taste of Book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and Book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and just re-uploading it to YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to get the next ones, search for My Stories by Rowan on YouTube for the best billionaire and CEO romance content. Remember, the official channel is My Stories by Rowan on YouTube and the My Stories platform. I'll be waiting for you there. Love, Rowan.